Mhm. I think it's important to make a distinction between legality of detention and its arbitrariness. A detention can be legal. All the existing legal procedures may have been implemented and still be arbitrary. And in this case, the working group has discussed at length all the details of the case, taking all the elements into consideration, and has decided that the opinion may be legal, but it is the detention may be legal, but it is arbitrary.
I don't really understand that.
You have to look at the details of the opinion, and that's a response to the first gentleman who raised the case. Why it took so long? It took so long because it's a very complicated case. It's an unusual case. I will also remind you that the working group is made of experts who are doing their work pro bono. So they do that in addition to their work, and the working group itself is called into action more and more and has a very difficult workload to manage. So that's the reason why it took so long to issue the opinion.
I'd like to follow up. Is this a legally binding opinion? And if it is, what happens in the case? And Britain and Sweden Britain says that if Assange leaves the Ecuadorian mission, that he will be arrested. Sweden says it wants to continue to examine him and have him deported. So what happens in those cases? Will they then be in violation of a legally binding agreement? And are there any sanctions?
Okay. On the first point, the working group is issuing opinion because it's a working group, it's not a court. So it's not issuing rulings. The second element is that the working group is the highest UN authoritative body to deal with disputes between persons who are in detention and authorities detaining them. This mechanism was created by the Commission of Human Rights, now the Council on Human Rights, because it was receiving a flow of requests for a flow of complaints from individuals in detention, and it delegated its authority to this working group to be able to deal with this large number of complaints. So the working group is as the delegated authority of the Commission of Human Rights, of the international community which constitute the Commission of Human Rights or the Council of Human Rights. Now, the opinion in itself is an opinion, and it is legally binding to the extent that it is based on international human rights norms which have been ratified by states. And when a state ratifies a convention, in this case the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, that state has the obligation to implement its provisions. So indirectly, yes, it is binding.
All right. But I asked you about But I asked about the British government arresting him. What if he leaves the mission?
Well, if he leaves the mission, he's likely to be arrested. And the conclusion of the working group, the recommendation of the working group, is that he should be able to enjoy his freedom of movement, which means that effectively he should be released and allowed to do whatever he wants.
All right, we have to move on. Elizabeth, you still have a question? Elizabeth, no? Imogen, please go ahead, and then we take Gunilla, Nina, and Jamie.
Imogen Folks, BBC. I'm still not quite clear how you got to the conclusion of arbitrary detention about an individual who chose freely to go inside a foreign embassy. And second, you talk about compensation. I'm just wondering what kind of, normally what kind of amount would apply in a case like this, were it to be offered?
Okay. The deprivation of liberty of Mr. Assange was triggered by a preliminary investigation that was initiated by a Swedish prosecutor 5 years ago. This preliminary investigation is still at the stage of preliminary investigation, as far as the working group is aware. 5 years later, there's been no progress in this investigation. Second, Mr. Assange has not been formally charged. But as a result of the preliminary investigation, European arrest warrant and an international arrest warrant have been issued, and the British authorities have been acting upon that international warrant to arrest him. I would remind that he was detained for 10 days incommunicado in London at the beginning of his arrest, and then he was held in house arrest for 550 plus days. And then he decided to seek asylum to the Ecuadorian embassy. On the question of compensation, the working group is not. This is outside the purview of its responsibility. Compensation has to be afforded to Mr. Assange, and it is up to the authorities whose action have been led to his deprivation of liberty to assess the case and decide what compensation he can be afforded. But the working group insists that he should have an enforceable right to compensation.
Thank you. Can we move on a little faster, please, because we have a press conference at 11:30 by Peter Sutherland. So I'll take Gunilla, Nina, Jamie and Elizabeth, and then we'll wrap this one up. Gunilla.
Okay, just a short question. Gunilla von Hall, Swedish journalist. Do you agree with the fact that... I'm sorry, I'm here. Hello. Hi. Do you agree with the fact that Julian Assange could choose to leave the embassy any moment he likes? Do you agree with that? You know, and how can you then say he's in detention? He can leave any second he wants.
The working group has taken the entire situation of Mr. Assange from the very moment he was deprived of his freedom 5 years ago throughout. So the first 10 days of detention, when he was detained in secrecy, and then the 500 plus days he was under house arrest, he was deprived of his freedom, and then the fact that at the embassy, if he leaves the embassy, he's going to be arrested. So they have taken the entire situation of Mr. Assange and decided that, given the thin legal basis of his restriction of freedom, he is detained arbitrarily.
Well, he could choose to leave and then be heard. That's what the Swedish authorities want. You know, he's not going to go out and be arrested. He can just leave the embassy and be heard by the Swedish authorities. It's that simple.
He is in the confines of the Ecuadorian embassies. Outside there is heavy police guard. He is under very intrusive surveillance, and it's likely that he is going out of the embassy, is going to be arrested.
Thank you. Sorry, Nina?
Sorry. So, Nina Larson, AFP, are you worried now that you're going to get a flood of requests from people who have committed crimes and or are suspected of committing crimes and who are in hiding, that they are also being arbitrarily detained?
That's part of, it's part and parcel of the work of the working group. The working group is receiving complaints from individuals who feel that they are arbitrarily detained. And then it's up to the working group to look at the case, and the working group has an adversarial approach to its work, whereby it receives information from both sides and makes its own assessment of the information and its own decision, guided by international human rights standards. So yes, this may occur.
Okay, yes. Sorry, Jamie, and then Elizabeth, and I really have to wrap it up with Stephanie then.
Christoph, hi, Jamie Keaton from Associated Press. Just to make sure that I heard you correctly, I came in at the last second there. You said it was not a unanimous decision, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
It was a majority decision.
Majority decision, and there was one of the 5 members who recused herself from the process, is that
Yes.
correct? So there were 4 total people voting?
Yes,
So it was a 3-1 decision,
yes.
okay? Can we know who voted how, please?
Sorry?
Can we know who voted how? Like which person voted which way, please?
Oh, as I said at the beginning, it was Mr. Toshilovsky
Okay, sorry.
from Ukraine who disagreed with the 3 other members.
Hi, Elizabeth Isakova from Russian news agency, RIA Novosti. I'm here. Yep, thanks. Actually, a follow-up, just can you please clarify, because Julian Assange said he's going to leave the embassy at noon to make a statement. So if he leaves the embassy, he's going to be arrested. Yes, that's correct? Because he said he's going to leave the embassy.
That I have no way of knowing what will happen. But given the heavy surveillance he is subjected to and the international arrest warrant, which is still valid, is likely to be arrested if he leaves the premises of the embassy. Logically.
Right.
Yeah, and sorry, and the follow-up: can the decision of this group be contested by Sweden and Great Britain?
Yes, there is a procedure whereby states can contest the decision. They can ask for a review. They have 2 months to file new information, and if this new information is of a nature to call into question the grounds for the decision, then the working group can revise its decision.
All right. Thank you very much. Stephanie?
Yeah, I was curious that you used the word enforceable, because I don't see how this is enforceable at all. You're saying that the compensation is enforceable. How could this be enforceable? There's no treaty behind this. There is no. Your interpretation is that based on norms, it's legally binding. But how could this be enforceable?
Well, you know that the weakness of international law is that there is no enforcement mechanism. So implementation of decision rests on the good faith commitment of states to honor their obligations under the treaties they have ratified. Now, in this particular case, there may be a new court case or new court action initiated by Mr. Assange and his lawyers, and in this context, in the UK or elsewhere, there may be an enforceable. There may be the possibility of an enforceable right to compensation. Yes, does that clarify it?
Do you have a follow-up, Jamie?
I'm sorry, I need to follow up on this. Mr. Tochilovsky, are we going to be able to get his dissenting opinion on this? And how unusual is it that there is not a unanimous decision?
It's very unusual that there is a decision not based on consensus. Usually the working group choose to decide on the basis of consensus. If you look at the opinion, which is provided to you through the links or in the back room there, the last page contains the dissenting opinion of the group member, of Mr. Toshilovsky. So you have the details of the reason why he's dissenting.
Do we need further clarification? I see 2 more hands up, so it is an important story. Nina and then Tom.
Sorry, here again, Nina Larson. I was just to clarify. So there were only three experts who agreed with this opinion, and also for the cameras, would it be possible to just summarize the opinion? The opinion of the working group, because it would be good for the camera.
You mean after this press briefing? You have it in front of you.
Yeah, they want it for the video cameras, for television. If you can just summarize.
Or you want to take the press release?
Really,
you want the deliberation itself, or the press release?
yeah, this is
the press release,
question, guys. Maybe we should have a separate press conference for this.
Huh?
Can you summarize it in 3 minutes?
Okay, I'm reading from the press statement. Okay. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been arbitrarily detained by Sweden and the United Kingdom since his arrest in London on 7 December 2010 as a result of the legal action taken against him by both governments, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention said today. In a public statement, The expert panel called on the Swedish and British authorities to end Mr. Assange's deprivation of liberty. I think the recommendation is quite clear. Respect his physical integrity and freedom of movement, and afford him the right to compensation. Mr. Assange, detained first in prison, then under house arrest, took refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012 after losing his appeal to the UK Supreme Court against extradition to Sweden, where a judicial investigation was initiated against him in connection with allegations of sexual misconduct. He was not formally charged. The Working Group on Arbitrary Detention considered that the various forms of deprivation of liberty to which Mr. Assange has been subjected to constitute a form of arbitrary detention. And this is the word of the President of the Working Group. The Working Group maintains that the arbitrary detention of Mr. Assange should be brought to an end, that his physical integrity and freedom of movement be respected, and that he should be entitled to an enforceable right to compensation. In its official opinion, the Working Group considered that Mr. Assange has been subjected to different forms of deprivation of liberty, initial detention at Wandsworth Prison in London, followed by house arrest, and then confinement in the premises of the Ecuadorian embassy. The expert also found that the detention was arbitrary because Mr. Assange was held in isolation in Wandsworth Prison and because a lack of diligence by the Swedish prosecutor office in its investigations resulted in his lengthy loss of liberty. 5 years, the investigation is still preliminary, no charges have been filed against him, but still he is deprived of his liberty. If this is not arbitrary, what is arbitrary detention? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
If Assange comes out and is arrested, then and he's put in. If Assange comes out and is arrested and is detained, then that would no longer be arbitrary detention. Is that right? I mean, if they put him in jail and said you're under arrest, can I clarify that? I mean, if he gets arrested, do you understand what I mean? If he comes out and he's arrested, it's not arbitrary detention, is it? It's standard detention.
I think the Working Group would have to look at the grounds for this new, either prolongation of his detention or new detention, and then make its decision.
Right. But just to be clear, if the government wants to arrest somebody for, they suspect of being a criminal, I mean, in this case, what should the governments do, or what should they have done differently to avoid this case of arbitrary detention? Because, they're waiting for him to come out, but, I mean, they want to arrest him. They can't exercise a warrant while he's in the embassy. How could they have avoided this arbitrary detention? It seems to me that the panel is blaming them for arbitrarily detaining him, but, what should they have done?
All right. Last question, last answer.
There were very serious criminal allegations made against Mr. Assange, allegations of sexual misconduct, allegations of rape. That's why there was a preliminary investigation ordered by the Swedish prosecutor, and normal preliminary investigation should have led to the collection of sufficient evidence to be able to file formal charges against Mr. Assange. And on the basis of these charges, then the authorities in Sweden could have decided that his case deserved that he be detained, to continue the investigation and the judicial proceedings. 5 years later, the investigation is still preliminary, and no charges have been filed against him.